Welcome, Rozalind.
Thank you so much. And I am just so excited that you've chosen to ask me to share with you this very, very secret Christmas cake recipe. And there's history in the making here for two reasons. One is that, as you've just said, yes, I have been following and teaching across the globe the raw vegan diet for over 30 years. Most of that has been in the form of doing talks and presentations, and I will tell you honestly, this is the first food demo I have ever done in my life. So we could be in for a really smooth ride, or it could be complete disaster. So I hope that if anything goes a bit awry, we can all find it funny, find our sense of humor, and just bowl me along with your support. In any case, I shall do my very best to share the best which I have in this regard, which is probably my Christmas cake, which comes to the second piece of the history in making, because I created this for my daughter Francesca many years ago, and I decided it was going to be a secret that was only to be handed down in the family, kind of like an inherited recipe. But anyway, I have been enticed to share it with you. I'm very excited to do so. And I do appreciate that those watching might not have been able to get exactly the ingredients that were listed, or they've got a slightly adapted version of that ingredient. And I just want to offer you encouragement and support in saying that almost any one of these ingredients, if it isn't quite the right one or it's slightly different, all you're going to end out with is a slightly different version of my Christmas cake, but you're still going to have Christmas cake. All right. For example, one of the things that I said we needed was some mixed vine fruits. Now, here in the UK, this is a pretty standard item that you can buy in the supermarket and certainly in the health food stores. And it consists of raisins and sultanas and currants. When I was in the US, it was amazing to me that so few people knew what a sultana was. They were familiar with raisins and currants, but the word sultana left them completely, confused. So don't worry if you could only get currants or only raisins, or the mix of the two, or your mixed fruits slightly different. The same way that when I said use medjool dates, if you find you couldn't get medjool, but you've got some other kind of date, that's going to be just fine. So welcome to this, what I hope is going to be a really fun, festive session with you all. Let me tell you a little bit about the Christmas cake history here. When I was a young girl, my mother used to make, of course, our annual Christmas cake, which I got very excited about. And the reason was actually not because I was so fond of the cake once it came out of the oven, but back in those days, my favorite thing was to lick the bowl of the mixture before it went into the oven. And the wonderful thing I've discovered about the raw vegan diet and the raw vegan Christmas cake is that I can actually eat an entire cake that is made before it goes in the oven. So this to me was a real treat. And this is what really prompted me to continue experimenting with recipes till I came up with something that really did taste the same as that which was in that delicious mixing bowl that my mother made. So here we go. I do appreciate that you're trying to follow, some of you actually making this at home. So I will try and go slowly enough that you can keep up with me as I go. So here on the table, I've set out some of the main ingredients just to go through them with you. The first is dried mulberries. Now, dried mulberries, they're just the cutest little things. They actually, when you put them in an S-blade, or process them with an S-blade in the blender, you're going to find that they will break down really well, but only to a point. They're never going to turn into a powder simply because they are sticky. So if you've been trying to do this before by putting them in the S-blade, just bear in mind that you will be able to get them to this kind of crumbly mixture, but it's still quite sticky and tacky. In fact, if I push this crumbly mixture together, you're going to see it actually holds into one piece. This is in our favor when it comes to the Christmas cake, because it's the dried mulberries and their ability to reconnect after being processed that allows us to make that nice cake consistency that we end up finally being able to cut into with a knife and make a slice that doesn't fall apart. So we have the dried mulberries, which you need to have available. They do take a while to process, but as I say, don't worry if they don't turn to crumbly powder. As long as you've broken them down as fine as they seem to want to go. The other tip with these is don't put too many at a time in your blender, because what you will end up with in the bottom, you'll get kind of this almost concrete-like glue, and the ones on the top will still be bouncing around as if they're at a disco. Okay, the idea is not to put too many in at a time, and then the whole lot will actually process as you desire. The mixed vine fruits I've already mentioned to you. I did say actually previously when my session here was put online that you needed to soak these the night before. Now please, if you didn't see that or you haven't done it or you forgot, don't throw your arms up in panic. It's okay. You have a couple of choices. Now, one is that you can literally use them as is. You're not going to come out with the same kind of cake texture that I'm trying to teach you here, but you will end up with a cake, so all is not lost. If you're a person who is more interested in coming up with as close as possible to the thing, and you're less interested in being strictly raw with the whole thing, you could, if I dare say, pop a little bit of hot water on it, yeah? Just while we're talking now, and they will soak up quite quickly. But either way, you'll be okay. Ideally, you put it into soak along with some lemon zest, preferably at least 12, if not 24 hours ago. Now, 12 hours is plenty. If you leave it more than 12 hours, you may well find that the water and the fruit will ferment, and you don't want that happening. It depends, of course, where in the world you live. You might live in a very warm environment, or you might be out there somewhere a lot cooler, in which case you soak it for longer. It's not quite such of a problem. Now, the lemon zest that I mentioned, that hopefully you would have been soaking this with, really needed to come from organic unwaxed lemons. The reason being, obviously, we are using the outside of the lemon, yeah? So what normally we do is we just give them a good scrub, and then using a grater, you can just use a cheese grater if that's all you have on the finer grating side, or if you have a lemon zester, and you're just going to remove the zest from that lemon and put that zest in a bowl with the dried fruit, I beg your pardon, with the mixed vine fruit, and then cover it with your water. I've got a bowl here that I had in soak, which is just here. You can probably see it's nice and soft, nice and damp. It swells up surprisingly, so hopefully you put enough water on that there was still water left when you'd finished. What I did here was I simply then drained that water off. I just put it all through a sieve and drained the water out, because that soak water we are going to use later. Now again, please don't throw your hands up in despair if you threw away your soak water. It's not a problem. You can just use some other ordinary water. Won't be perhaps quite as flavorful, but you're not losing an enormous amount of the flavor in that water, just a little bit. Water again, hopefully it was reverse osmosis, distilled, filtered in some way, because tap water can taint the taste of the cake. There's other things I have in bowls here. If you're getting stuff ready out in your kitchen now, perhaps you weren't quite prepared in time. We have a bowl of pecans, pecan halves actually, in this bowl here. We also had flaked almonds. I think in some countries these have different names, but it's essentially when the almond has been cut into some really shaved slices that are very, very slim. And I'm sure different places will have different names for that. But these are the flaked almonds. They're going to go in the cake itself to add some real interesting textures as you eat. We have the medjool dates. Need I say, don't forget to take the pit out of the middle of the dates. Maybe you haven't used medjool dates before, but they do have a sizable pit inside. Sometimes it can be a bit elusive, and you open it up and you think, hey, there's no pit in here, and you throw it in the blender, and the next thing you hear is this terrible rattling noise, and you realize there was one hiding away in there. So I have a medjool date here just to show you. It's very simple. You just dig your fingers in, split it into two, and lo and behold, there in the middle, we have that dear little pit just waiting to jam up your blender. So we take that out, and then you're going to use the rest of your date. These are some ground almonds, different from almond flour. Now, I don't think that just about any shop you walk into, they're instantly going to have both available unless you live in a very privileged place, possibly California. Certainly here, you can get both of these online, so I'm sure you can anywhere. The difference is simply in how fine this nut has been processed. Here, flaked almonds, they look a little bit like sand that you might find on the beach, whereas almond flour really is more like a very fine powder, and both give a slightly different texture when you add them to your food. And as we go along, we'll see how we're going to use those in different ways. Spices, we needed, of course, to have our mixed spice, a little tiny bit of cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. Never be too heavy on the clove. It's a very powerful flavor, and it can dominate the rest of what you're making. Interestingly, the challenge to me was, what quantities did I use? Well, this was an exciting and interesting question, because I've never really thought about it. I just kind of put it in as I go along, sort of intuitively. And I decided to share with you the recipe in terms of cups, because that makes the most sense. Some of you might not have been able to get a lot of ingredients together, so perhaps couldn't fill a cup this big. This is not the cup that I'm referring to, but if you were doing a big, massive cake for an enormous number of people, maybe you would use a cup that big. If you're just wanting to make a little cake, you might even choose a little cup that big. How cute is that? But the average cup is going to be 8 fluid ounces, which is the size of this cup here, which is the one I was going by. It doesn't matter what size your cup is, as long as you use it consistently for all the different ingredients that we're using, and then the proportions will all be right to each other. Obviously, depending on which size cup you're using, you would adapt your spices accordingly, and accordingly also with your taste. So the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to process the mulberries. So we're going to use the food processor, removing the lid, making sure that the S-blade is well in place. And then we're just going to take the mulberries and tip them in.
I don't think it's fully plugged in.
We're going to put this back on. Okay. It is turned on, I believe. Francesca, my daughter, is just testing that I'm fixed up the electrics. I think I am.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought it was. Okay.
I can see that.
Now, please don't think that I've just decided I'm going to bring in an aeroplane or a helicopter into the scene. I do wear ear defenders when I use a food processor. Our ears are really not designed for the levels of noise that most of us subject ourselves to, and it is accumulative over time. I happen to choose to be particularly careful. Some machines these days are much quieter, but for me, these are two rather loud machines if I'm going to be using them on a regular basis. So I'm going to pop these on, and then I'm going to just turn, make sure the lid's on, and put this on full blast. Okay, so now we have the mulberries processed. And as I said to you before, I did do the bulk of mine beforehand. I do appreciate that many of you now will be busily trying to process all your mulberries. Don't rush, don't hurry, don't panic, just go ahead, because I'm going to just be transferring these. These are the ones I did before, and as you can see, they were almost forming their own form inside that smaller bowl. And just tipping them into my larger bowl. I am using a nice large bowl for this Christmas cake making because it is quite a quantity of ingredients. So taking off the Escalade, putting it to the side, I'm just going to tip this last bit in here. It's always good to have a spatula handy, just to scrape out the bits that stick around the edge. There we go. I have thoroughly washed my hands before I started this endeavor. I'm assuming you all did too, because as my mulberries were pre-processed, some of them are stuck together a bit, I'm simply going to put my hands in and just break them all up again to make them nice and crumbly. And as you see, this mixture is a crumble now, rather than those solid little mulberries that we started with. So those of you who are processing your mulberries, just process them until it looks like a crumble. You're not going to get a powder. It's not going to be anything like as fine as flour. It's going to be like an apple crumble topping. Yeah? Gosh, that sounds delicious. Maybe we should do that next time, apple crumble. So just breaking these up now. If you get left behind at all as we're making the cake, perhaps you could let my husband know, who is there taking your questions and so on and so forth. And then I can be asked to slow down a little bit. I don't want to leave anybody behind. It can take a while to process these mulberries. But be patient. Once they start to go, then they really go. And then you get this nice crumbly powder. One of the big challenges on a raw vegan diet for those who like to do pastries and cakes and so on is finding an alternative to flour, as in regular wheat flour. Now, mulberries actually like this can lend themselves quite well, and as I said before, partly because they do stick together when asked to fairly well. Another thing, interestingly, that you can do instead of using wheat flour, of course, is using either ground almonds or almond flour. When you use the almond flour, that will go pretty hard pretty quickly. I mean, if you mix almond flour with water, for example, it will get very hard once it's dried, whereas the ground almonds tend to stay more pliable, a bit like making a pastry or a short crust pastry. But both of these things are useful alternatives on a raw vegan diet to regular flour. So once you've processed all your mulberries, broken them down to this nice crumble, you want to get yourselves a nice big bowl and pop them in there. Now, hopefully your mulberries are only taking up slightly less than half the bowl, because you're going to need the rest for other ingredients. We're going to be doing a fair bit of mixing, and so you need a good gap between your ingredients and the top of the bowl. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of it on your table and work surface. Yeah? So there go my mulberries, all mixed in and all nice and crumbly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on, and if you've had your dried fruit soaking, perhaps you could now drain that, and I'll show you one of the ways to do that. Could you pass me the sieve out of the centre bottom drawer, please? Yeah. Yeah. That's a little small. Oh, it's behind me. I'm sorry. It's behind me.
It's okay.
So here I have just a regular sieve. If you place this in a bowl, just like this, and then you can pour in your soaked dried fruit bit by bit, and the liquid will fall through to the bottom, and then what's in the sieve you just put it in a separate bowl somewhere. But do remember, keep your soap water if you didn't already do this and you haven't thrown it away this morning. Now then, our dried mulberries. This is the basis now of our cake. What we're going to do now is we are going to move on and add in some of the other ingredients. And the first one to go in is going to be our pecan nuts. Now, the thing with the pecan nuts is you don't want to process them too much, because the idea of a Christmas cake is that it's got lots of lovely different textures that you can experience in your mouth when you're eating it. We don't want to turn everything to powder. So we're going to pop the pecan nuts into the blender. Again, we're using the same S-blade and we're going to process it up, but don't process it to a powder, just process it to, you've got basically broken pecan nuts. Yes, just nice little chewy pieces of nut. So it's just a quick whiz. I'm going to pop it in there. And we're going to put the lid on. Once again, I'm going to put my ear protectors on. And I'm just going to put it on for a short while. And that's all it takes, just to get those pecan nuts down to nice little chewy pieces. Take out the S-blade and very simply add it to our mulberry mix. In it goes. Use my spatula just to get those last bits out. When you're working, it's always a good idea to have next to you just a clean, damp cloth, because raw vegan food is very much a hands-on type of cuisine, and your hands do get messy quite easily. And you don't want to be transferring ingredients from one utensil or one bowl to another inappropriately. And it's a much nicer way of feeling your hands around this wonderful food than having hands that look like boxing gloves because they're so covered in every type of ingredients. So always having that little cloth's a great thing. So here we have the mulberries and we have the pecans. And now I'm going to put my hands in one more time. It's so much fun making this cake because it really is a very tactile experience. You get to put your hands in and really put a lot of your own creativity flowing from you into the food. It's a great feeling. So we've mixed in these pecan nuts now. Maybe some of you out there are still blending them up in your S-blade. Don't cut them too fine, remember, because we do want them to have a little bit of bite to them. Little pieces like this, maybe that's a half a pecan here, and there's a quarter of a pecan here, and all different shapes and sizes. So we're going to mix those in now to the thoroughly blended with these. So here we have it. Now we have the mixture, mulberries and pecans. The next thing to go in there now is going to be our flaked almonds. And remember that you may well find where you come from, the name for these is slightly different. They're just very finely shaved pieces of almond. Now, these finely shaved pieces of almonds really don't need any processing to go in the cake. They're already in these lovely, chewy little pieces. If we make this any smaller, you're going to end up with ground almonds, which is really not what we wanted. We want to have this extra texture, this extra shape, and also it adds color to the cake. The cake has a tendency to be quite dark in color, whereas these tiny snowflakes in the cake, which makes it extra Christmassy. So without processing them, I'm literally just going to dump the whole lot in my mixture. Back in go the hands, and we're now going to mix all this in together. This delicious smell of mulberries coming up as I'm doing this. It's quite tantalizing. Now, because it's still nice and dry and not in any way particularly moist, this is a good opportunity now to pop in our little bit of vanilla powder. Now, if you haven't been able to get vanilla powder, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. You could use some little vanilla pods, in which case you would need to crush them, perhaps with a pestle and mortar. Or you could even use a little bit of vanilla essence if that's what would suit you better. So in it goes. Incidentally, while we're doing this, just to mention that I am very aware that the mixture of nuts and fruit is not a good combination digestively on a general rule. And people worry a lot about their digestion, and quite rightly so, because the dried fruit and the nuts require different digestive environments. They tend to clash a little bit. But unless you have a compromised digestive system, I would dare to say that what to me really supports good digestion is to be able to eat your Christmas cake feeling inner peace, feeling the joy of the festive season and the time spent with loved ones. Eating it in an unhurried way, in a stress-free atmosphere, is far more important for your digestion for most people than the fact that you've mixed some nuts with some dried fruit. I know Christmas technically is a time of great stress potentially, with all the gifts to buy and the entertaining to do, but to really take your time when you finally eat a piece of this cake in real graceful poise with deep inner peace, this is going to be far more conducive to good digestion than simply making sure you get your combinations right. And besides, we don't have Christmas cake every day, which is why it's called Christmas cake. We only have it once a year, and generally speaking, our bodies deal pretty well with that. So here we have that. Now we're going to put in this vanilla. This is just vanilla powder. I'm going to put in a whole good teaspoon. That was a nice heaped teaspoon. I'm going to mix that in as well. Right, now, the next thing I'm going to put in here is I'm going to pop in the mixed dried fruit that had been soaking. This does not need to be processed, this mixed dried fruit, other than having been soaked. We're not going to put it in the blender or the Vitamix or anything else, or the food processor. It's going to go in just as is. So here it is. Here's the dried fruit that I prepared by soaking it previously. There's a little bit of extra water I can see that I've missed that's floating in here. So I'm just going to step over to the sink and just let that drain off, as I don't want my cake too wet just with water at this point. And you might be thinking, how's she going to tip that out of that bowl without the whole lot going down the sink? Well, I'll teach you a little trick here. What I do is I just get a large plate and just put it over the edge there. And that way I can let the water go and still hold on to my dried fruit. Perfect. So here we go. The dried fruit that is now rehydrated is going to be added to this delicious mixture. And it goes. Now it starts to get really fun with the fingers, because we've now got a lot of moisture in there as well. You can mix it in if you prefer with a large spoon and just start mixing all this in. In some ways that can be helpful. In other ways, you may be better just to put your hand straight in. But do be sure when you do this that you go right to the bottom of the bowl and really get it all mixing in beautifully together. This really is hands-on creative culinary art. It's interesting how so many people like to enjoy long fingernails these days, but when it comes to this sort of thing, they are a little bit inconvenient. because you find a lot of your Christmas cake you're wearing on the ends of your fingers. As I say, you can use a spoon if that's more comfortable for you. So let's mix all this in, really getting it blending well together. And I can see in here I have these delicious little bitey pieces of pecan. I have those beautiful little snowflakes of the flaked almonds. And I'm getting this nice aroma coming up now where the vanilla has started to make itself known as I turn this in my hands. I don't know about you, but I always feel at my best when I'm being creative. There we go. Right. I'm just going to give my hands a little rinse. I hope you're all doing okay out there and managing to keep up with things here. There's no need for us to race along too fast. We have plenty of time. So I'm just going to go back now over what I've done so that everybody has a chance to catch up or make notes or do whatever they want to do if they have got slightly left behind. So the very first thing that we did was that last night, hopefully, we put the dried fruit, which was the mixed vine fruits, in soak with enough water that it really did cover them very well because they swell a lot as they hydrate. And into that mixture last night, or 12 hours ago, or whenever it was, we put in the zest of some organic unwaxed lemons. And you needed to have put 4 in if you were using the 8 cups of mulberry combination. Reminding you again that it doesn't matter what size cup you use, as long as you use the same for all the ingredients in a measuring cup, you'll still get the proportions right. The next thing that we did was we processed our mulberries. We took those lovely cute little mulberries and we popped them in the S-blade and watched them all dance about in there until they were reduced to a sticky, crumbly mixture. And then we put the sticky, crumbly mulberries into the bowl and separated them a little bit with our fingers to get them even more of a crumble mixture. Once we'd done that, we took our pecan nuts, we put them again in the S-blade, making sure that we didn't turn them to powder, but we simply broke them down into nice edible pieces. We also added on the flaked almonds, which we didn't process, if you remember, because we really liked the little snowflake shapes that gave us that extra additional kind of texture in the final cake here. We added in as well a heaped teaspoon of vanilla powder, and we did mention that if you couldn't get that, vanilla essence was acceptable, or if you needed to break down vanilla pods with a pestle and mortar, you could do that too. So we've got in here then the mulberries are in here, the soaked dried fruit is in here, which was the vine fruits. The lemon zest is in here as well. So is the vanilla powder, the pecans, and the almonds. And we've now got this mixture that really is starting to look like that fruit nut cake that my mother used to make for Christmas time. What we need to do now is we need to take the next step, whereby we're going to bind this all together with a delicious date mixture that's going to make everything come together so that we can cut it in a slice as opposed to have it just as a crumble that falls apart. And for that, we're going to be using our medjool dates. And here's some medjool dates that I have already taken the pits out of. Do remember they do have these pits inside. We don't want them going in our food machines because it can damage the blades, not to mention you don't want to be swallowing them either. So on this occasion now, I'm going to turn over to the other machine I have here, which is a Vitamix. Now the Vitamix, in my opinion, is a superb blender. It really is powerful, but don't worry if you don't have one. Just a regular kitchen blender will do the same job. Dates obviously are tremendously sticky, and so there can be problems with them adhering a little bit to the blade and not mixing really well unless you put in sufficient water. I did mention previously that I hoped you'd kept the water from soaking your dried mixed vine fruits. If you haven't, you can just use regular water. But I've got some water here that I saved from when I soaked the fruit overnight, and I'm going to use that to mix with some dates to blend up into this liquid form that I can then bind my cakes mixture together with. So I'm going to take out the plunger, take off the lid, which is a little stiff, there we go. And into here, I'm just going to drop my dates straight in. So let's pop them in. Again, the quantity of this is not an exact science. If you find you haven't got enough of this date mixture to bind your cake together, simply make it a little bit more. If you make a little bit too much, well, there you have something nice to add to your breakfast. So in go the dates. Now in here also, I am going to be putting the rest of the spices as well. And so we're going to put in mixed spice. Mixed spice really is the primary spice in this Christmas cake. Please do not make a mistake and use allspice instead. Allspice is a completely different flavoring and not really going to be suitable for your Christmas cake. It's mixed spice. If you weren't able to get mixed spice, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, a little bit of clove, that'll do. You can make it up yourself, but most stores in most parts of the world have something called mixed spice. So I'm going to put some in here now. Now, this is the kind of fun part where you can taste as you go and see how you're doing. This is a very small little spoon I've got here, so 2 of these spoons, in fact, make a teaspoon. Let me get a more appropriately sized teaspoon, one moment. This is a better teaspoon. So I'm going to put a good amount of allspice in here because this really is the key to the flavor of the cake. And I'm going to taste this before I put it on the cake. And so I can make it suitable for my palate. Now, some people do prefer much stronger flavorings than others. For example, with Doug and myself, Doug does not enjoy ginger, even in small amounts. I can eat enormous amounts of ginger, and it isn't too strong for me. And I found this among people generally to be very much true, that people have different preferences and different tolerances to different flavorings. And in fact, they experience the flavors in quite different ways. It really does seem to be quite a unique and personal thing. So when you're making this mixture that we're going to do now with the medjool dates, before you put it on your cake, have a little taste. But bear in mind, it's going to be a lot more concentrated in your mixture than it's going to end up in your cake. Once this has been transferred to here and mixed in with this large amount of fruit nut mixture, it's really going to be reduced in its impact. So it needs to be tasting pretty strong in here to have a moderate effect on your cake. So I've put in some mixed spice. Here now with the cinnamon, I'm just going to put a little bit of cinnamon in. Cinnamon, I don't want it to be the dominating flavor, but I do like a good bit of cinnamon. So probably a couple of teaspoons, maybe that I'm not doing them. This is not lending itself very well, this shaker, to my measure. So I'm having to guess a little bit there. Nutmeg can add a very interesting undertone to your cake, but if you put too much in, it can be quite dominant and not always in a good way. So when you put your nutmeg in, I would just put in just a little bit, okay? Maybe just 1 flat teaspoon is probably enough. And then of course we come to clove. Clove is the most powerful tasting of all of the spices here. And we really only want to put a little bit of your clove in. Otherwise, you're going to think you've having dental treatment. Okay, so we're just going to put a little bit of stuff clove in here. I'm only going to put a bare half, in fact that's about 1/3 of a teaspoon that's going in there.
Rosalind, may I interrupt your flow for a moment?
Yeah.
We have a question about how much water did you put in the dates?
Ah, that's an excellent question. How much water did I put in the dates? Do you know what? I haven't put any in yet.
That's why I didn't know the answer, but you were going to put some soak water in, yes?
Pop the dates in. Now, again, because I don't know the size of your cups, I'm not quite sure how much sauce you're going to need for your recipe. But what you want the sauce to be is you want it to be thin enough that it's going to add a liquid form to your cake, and yet thick enough that the cake isn't going to fall apart. It needs to be held. So how we measure that is we put in enough water only for the blades to function, yeah? The blades to function and blend it all smooth. All you need is enough to make the dates go smooth. You don't need more than that, yeah? You're not trying to make a thin smoothie or a sauce type. You're simply wanting enough for the blend, for the medjool dates or whatever dates you've used to become smooth, a bit like a custard, if you see what I'm saying, yeah? So I'm going to put it in and see how we go here. Usually, if I put in just enough to cover the blades, that may well be enough to turn these dates into a thick paste, which is what I'm looking for, a thick paste. Please always remember to push down the lid on your blender. There have been many a kitchen decorated with raw vegan food, okay? So give it a good push, make sure it's in place. And the plunger is very useful, especially with small quantities of ingredients like this. So I'm going to pop on my aeroplane headgear again, turn this on and see if I can get myself a nice thick paste. Now I'm going to need just a little bit more moisture in here because what's happened is it's so thick that the blades are turning underneath the mixture rather than really getting it all blended smooth. So I'm just going to pop a tiny little bit more water in. And then I'm going to turn it back on and see how we go. Now, I don't know if you were busy doing your own blending or whether you heard my Vitamix, but there was a change in the pitch of the mixing noise when it's keyed in, had enough liquid and actually started to turn it into this paste. And if I pull my plunger out, you can see the paste here. Yeah? Yeah, my daughter is sitting there with her tongue sticking out. I think she's hoping for a lick of the sauce here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put this in the mixture, the cake mixture, and stir it in. There may not be enough here to bind this together, in which case it's very simple. We just make some more. So in it goes. And as you can see, if I do it from a height here, you can see the consistency. Plop, plop. It's like a thick paste that I'm popping in there. So you can use your own judgment with your dates and your water to get that thick paste and to get enough to be able to make your cake start to turn into something a little bit more solid. So I've scraped it out with a spatula. Now I'm not going to put my hands in it this time because now it's getting quite gooey. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my large spoon. Actually, a salad serving spoon works quite well, just a regular serving spoon. If not, use a wooden spoon. It doesn't really matter. But we're going to start mixing this all in together. Now I can see already that I'm going to need a lot more of the date mixture to make this stick together. So I'm going to get some more dates. I'm going to pop them in that Vitamix and mix them all up. As this is just starting to bind together, but it's not quite enough yet. So the smell is absolutely delicious. I can smell the cinnamon, gives that lovely warm feeling, and the clove, the nutmeg, and that fantastic mixed spice. It's starting to remind me straight away of my childhood and my mother's kitchen and eating her raw cake ingredients. So stirring it in, here we go. Right, it's just not holding it together quite enough for me yet. It's nearly doing so, but not quite. And I will show you, if I tip my bowl up, you can see how it's definitely getting a lot more tacky than it was. In fact, if I do put my hand in and squeeze a chunk, it does almost stay together in one piece. But I think I would like a little bit more just to make sure my cake's nice and moist. This is where real bit of judgment and, to be honest, a little experience pays off. Getting that balance between your mixture being so moist that it falls apart, which you don't want, or so dry that your cake tastes dry. So it's getting that lovely balance between the two. Takes a little bit of practice, but you'll soon get the knack. So I'm going to just get a couple more dates. Remembering to take the pits out. And not just the pits, but also the little piece at the stem end that can sometimes end up in your food, which you don't really want. It's totally harmless, but it's a little bit more chew than you're probably looking for. So let's just pop those in the blender now. Here we go. Two. I have one here I prepared earlier, so 3. I'm just going to stick just another 5 dates in there, should be plenty. Now, I don't need to add any more of the spices to this. I've already put the spices I think appropriate in the mix, but because I don't know for sure if the cake has enough flavor or whether I want to put more in, I'm actually going to do a little taste of the Christmas cake mixture now. My daughter is over here jumping up and down like a ping pong ball. She wants to volunteer to taste. Because at this point, if I taste this cake and I think, oh, wow, that's tasting a little bland, now is my opportunity to put in a little bit more flavoring. On the other hand, if I taste it and it's just fine, then I should just blend this up and pop it straight in. So I'm going to get a teaspoon here. Give it a little rinse. And I'll see what I think. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Delicious. But I think I'm going to put it a little bit more mixed spice in my last little date whiz over here. Here we go. I'm going to put a little bit more mixed spice in there to really pep it up. I'm going to put more of my soap water in. And then once again, we're going to blend that in this amazing machine here. Pushing the lid down firmly. I don't really want to decorate the kitchen. Stick in the plunger. Here we go. It's surprising how generous you can be with your mixed spice in this recipe without it becoming too overpowering. The tendency is not to put in nothing, and then you find yourself wistfully wishing that you had done more when you come to cut your slice. So feel free to be generous with that. Here I'm just putting this next little date bundle in here. Do be cautious when you use these rubberized spatulas in your Vitamix, because unless you move it with care, you can actually damage the spatula on the blades of the Vitamix. So rather than just brandishing it around inside vigorously, always take a little look and just make sure you're not damaging the spatula. So once more, I'm going to mix this in now. Ah, yes, now this is really starting to mix together now. It's really starting to form what I was hoping it would, a fairly solid mixture. Because of the mulberries and how they do have this wonderful propensity for gripping together, as well as the stickiness of the date mixture, it enables us to make something that when it's compressed a little, as it will be in a moment, into the cake tin, that once it's sat there for a moment or two, you literally can cut it and make a slice of Christmas cake, which is, of course, the most exciting moment of all. So here we go, mixing it all in. For those of you with children, you know, this is a wonderful time to share with them. And it can be really beautiful that they come along and they all have a little stir and they help to stir the cake. It can be such a lovely family tradition to do that with young children. I would just advise you, though, if you are having children help you with the preparation of this cake, I don't recommend that they do the zesting of the lemon, because for a little child to grate their fingers on the grater or the lemon zester is enough to put them off culinary arts for life. It can be very painful. So please keep little one's fingers away from the grating or the zesting. But other things that they can do definitely include the wonderful stirring that has to take place with this recipe. So mix it all up here. Now then, the way that I have this now is that if I take a little bundle of this and I squeeze it together in my hand, I can actually make it into a ball that sits on the palm of my hand. It's not falling apart, it's now held together by the stickiness of the date mixture and also the propensity of the mulberries to grip onto each other. So we've reached a point now, which is an exciting stage in the game, where we get to put this cake mixture into the actual form it's going to take. So there is a little bit of hand rinsing required. And it's worth mentioning at this point, you know, that any of these recipes, they will become your own after a while. All I'm really giving you here is the place to start with creating your own Christmas cake. You may find that you prefer different nuts in your Christmas cake. You might prefer to remove the pecans and put in walnuts, for example. You might be a person who particularly prefers a heavier ginger flavor in your Christmas cake. There's all sorts of variations that you can come up with and you can create and really make it your cake. The variety is almost endless, in fact. But this is a great place to start, great place to have a bit of fun. And definitely the adding of cinnamon really gives it a Christmassy feeling. It's a very Christmassy spice, cinnamon, as I'm sure you're aware. Do be cautious, as I say, of putting in too much of the clove. That can very quickly become quite overpowering. So now the next thing that I need to do is to press my mixture into the form that it's going to be shaped with. And here I have a springform cake tin. Now, it has a little buckle on the front here, which means that I can unbuckle it and the bottom comes out. This is very important when making this cake, because otherwise you're going to create a cake that you cannot get out of the cake tin. It needs to be springform, yeah? That's perfect. To put it together again, you simply drop the base back in, let it sit on the little lip that's around the inside, and then you just, whoops, she says as it falls apart. Oh, I turned it the wrong way. Sorry about that. You just clip it across and it's back in there again. Yeah, really, really useful tins. This is a non-stick tin. It is preferable if you can get one of those too. Excellent. So, making myself a little space here, I'm just going to push a couple of these things forward out of the way. Now then, I have a lot more mixture in my bowl than is going to fit in my little tin. And the reason that I've done that is because for those of you who want to get really adventurous, you can, if you want to, make a 2-layer cake. Another way of using up this mixture is very, very simple. Your Christmas cake is going to be so delicious and so popular that no sooner have you put it on the table than it has disappeared, okay? And this is another wonderful benefit about the raw vegan diet. You don't have to say to your guests in the sitting room, oh, excuse me, for 3 or 4 hours, I just go and have to make another Christmas cake. You nip into the kitchen, you take your filling, you fill up your form again, unclip the little buckle, lift the lid off, and ding, you have a replacement Christmas cake for the one they've just eaten. Which is marvelous. It really, really does impress the guests when you suddenly present out in the sitting room or wherever it is there, a replica of your first cake that you just happen to have ready. Because I promise you, everybody, this is going to be eaten so darn quick that you won't even know what's happened. It's that good. So I'm going to take my large spoon, which I've temporarily lost. Not to worry, I'll get another one. I'm going to spoon this mixture straight in. Don't need to line it with anything, no paper, nothing. It'll be just fine if it's non-stick. And I'm going to dollop, is probably the best word, my mixture straight into this tin. Now, as you put it in, you want to cover the bottom as best you can. If you can see, I'm just patting it down, covering the bottom of the tin. The reason that I'm doing it this way is because I'm trying to compress it as I put it in. So I put a dollop in, I compress it down with my nice large spoon, okay? If you don't have a large spoon, a smaller spoon will do. It'll just take you a little longer. I'm being very cautious because non-stick bakeware does not appreciate being hit with metal. You can actually damage the non-stick in it. So as you go around, I'm keeping my utensil just short of the edge so that I don't damage my pan here. There we go. Squishing it down. This cake, actually, having said it will disappear quickly, it is a very adaptable cake because it will also last a reasonable period of time, providing you keep it in the refrigerator. In my family, I know that it's not going to last more than about 10 minutes. So pushing it down here, getting it firmly in, compressing it each time. There we go. the lovely, lovely aroma that's coming up from this is really delicious. So just keep on patting it down. If you find your mixture's a little dry, again, another great benefit of the raw vegan diet, it is so forgiving. Because if you want to, if you find it's not working, it's not compressing down to make this nice solid base here, you can simply take all of your ingredients out of your form, put it back in your bowl, blend some more dates, make it a bit wetter and try again. It's so much easier to make raw vegan food than your regular cooked fare. You can adapt, you can change your mind halfway through, you can add, you can really play around with it until you get it exactly as you want. And that's true of most raw vegan recipes. Very, very forgiving way of making food. So here I go, still packing it in. Because it compresses so well, you'd be amazed how much mixture you need to fill even a moderate sized tin. I hope you're having fun there, those of you who are joining in as we go along, getting this all pressed in. There we go. I'm going to fill it pretty much to the top of the form. I want it level if I can with the top of the form. Keep on pushing it as you do it all the time, pressing down with the spoon. You can press quite hard, pushing, pushing. Press, press, here we go. Another thing that you can do, if you have any mixture left over, is you could make some little mince pies. That's another fun thing to do. You have to learn on this wonderful Sunday get-together how to make some nice pastry for your mince pies, and then you can just fill them with this mixture, the same mixture. Goes down really well. So again, trying not to touch the edge with my metal spoon. Metal tends to work a lot better for this pressing and smoothing process because wood is a little bit more tactile, and it can actually drag the mixture across the surface, whereas a metal spoon really just slides beautifully across, gets it all pressed against the sides. There we go. Almost there. It takes a while. You have to be really insistent that it squashes down. Now, in a moment, we're going to do the next phase, which is to make the topping of the cake. Now, the topping of my Christmas cake is essentially a marzipan topping, which is a classic topping for a Christmas cake in the UK. Marzipan is one of those things that people usually either love it or hate it. It's a little bit like durian. People who love it just can't get enough of it, and people who don't like it can't even bear the smell of it. So there we go. Just about got to the top of my form now, top of the pan. This is really taking a lot of mixture, this particular cake tin. I was surprised how much went in here today. But it's pressed down very hard, really compact. And that's the trick of getting it to stick together. Just a little bit over this side. In it goes. Right, the last bit in the corner here. Now that's funny, isn't it? The corner in a round bowl. What am I thinking? The last bit over here, I should say. Okie doke. So here we have it. Fully filled. This is going to be our core of Christmas. This is going to be a highlight of Christmas, trust me. So now we're going to make this marzipan topping. Now, as I've said, some people like marzipan and some people don't. If people don't, one thing that you can do to give this a nice little topping here is you can get a mixture of desiccated coconut, such as I have here. You can mix desiccated coconut if you want to, with a little bit of almond, ground almonds, mix them together and just sprinkle it over the top. If they don't like, hopefully they won't dislike almonds completely because there's almonds in the cake. But some people who don't like marzipan are still perfectly happy eating straight almonds. Or you could just sprinkle a little bit of just the plain almond without the coconut on top, which would maintain more of a sort of a Christmassy feel to it. But we're going to go ahead and make the marzipan now. So I'm just going to place this over here for a moment. The marzipan is very easy to do. This relies once more on this S-blade machine. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to take my ground almonds. This is going to be made to form a pastry ball in my hands that I can then use a rolling pin to roll out and place on top of the cake. And it's going to be tasting very, very much like traditional original marzipan. So getting your S-blade then, make sure everything's in place. It is important, incidentally, to make sure that this S-blade is always well pushed down. Sometimes it's perhaps sitting on a little bit of food that's got left in there from the previous mixing, and it doesn't quite go down, and then you wear away the top of the plastic here on the top of the S. So do be sure it's really clear and clean, and drop it right down in there. So in now goes ground almonds. Now again, the number of cups that you use or the amount that you use depends on the size of your cake. And the great thing is it's so forgiving, you can always make more. So I'm just going to pop in here a whole pile of ground almonds. And very importantly, I'm not going to just drop almond essence into there because it will be just quickly absorbed by the ground almonds and be in one specific point or one little clump of that final ball. I actually want it to be mixed in as generally as possible. Almond essence, the more natural obviously that you can get, the better. That will pretty much just have almond extract. You can get almond extract, just almond extract and a little bit of distilled water. It's not easy to find. Usually there's going to be a couple of other things in there, but let's bear in mind the amount you're using is minute. This is not a large quantity that you're going to be consuming. A very small amount in here, and that's going to be over one very large cake. So I'm going to put this now into the liquid that I'm going to use, and the liquid is actually my freshly squeezed orange juice. So for those of you who haven't squeezed your oranges now, you need to go and just cut up your oranges. Probably about 4 oranges would do if you've got a couple of cups of ground almonds in there. That'll give you plenty. Once you've juiced those oranges, we're going to be putting some, dribbling it in until we turn this into this nice marzipan. I would recommend that you first of all take a little bit of that orange juice, and I'm going to actually use a cup, for a little cup for this. I'm going to use one of my, this is a tiny cup here. I'm going to pour some orange juice in there. It doesn't matter how much, just a little bit. Not because I'm about to drink it, but because that's where I'm going to put my almond essence, to mix it in with that larger volume of liquid before it goes in on top of the ground almonds. Once again, this is something whereby it's a matter of taste. Some people like really strongly flavored almond in their marzipan. Other people like it to be far more subtle. So there's no accounting for all tastes. You can only account for your own. So do it to a degree that it tastes good to you, and then the people who share it with you will enjoy it to a greater or lesser degree. So here is my almond essence. I'm going to take now my teaspoon, and I'm going to put a whole teaspoon, 1, 2, 3 teaspoonfuls of almond essence to start with in that orange juice. You don't need much orange juice, and you're only going to dribble it in slowly. So although I have a great big pint glass here, that's because at the end of this I was figuring on drinking the rest of it. So I'm going to click on the lid of my machine here. I've got my ground almonds in there, remember, and I'm going to drizzle in my little mixture of orange juice with those teaspoons of almond essence. As I'm pouring it in, the machine is going to gradually make it look as if it's turning into a kind of a crumbly mixture. And then as I continue to dribble really slowly, that almondy, crumbly mixture will start to turn more wetter and wetter and wetter. And then finally, the whole thing will just ball up, hopefully, and whiz around inside my machine. And that's quite a little bit of magic. So you might want to watch me do mine before you do yours. Did you see how that eventually just turned into a ball and went whizzing round inside the machine? I'm going to lift the actual S blade to get it out. And here I have the perfect ball of marzipan. Now then, I'm just going to remove the other bits that got left behind in the machine. Pat it all together. And there it sits on my hand. Marzipan. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to push it together a little bit, get it to form really nicely in my hands. And then we come to the second little tasting session of the day. I'm going to pluck a little bit off here, and just taste it to see if it's to my liking and it has enough almond essence in it. think I need to put a little bit more almond in mine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something which is going to also add a little bit of more firmness to my ball here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit more ground almonds. 1 second. I'm going to pop them in. Again, it's trial and error a lot with this raw vegan recipe, because taste is so important. You want to get the taste absolutely right. If you've got any doubt that isn't quite as strong a flavor as I wanted, or it's a little bit too much, keep playing with it. It's fine. It's worth putting in the time and effort and tasting slightly as you go along to really get the great result we're looking for. So back to my little cup. This time, actually, you can do it with a little bit more orange juice. I also have some soak water left from my dried fruit. And so I'm going to use that this time. Pop it in my little cup. And then I'm going to add some more almond essence into my cup. At least I would if I could get the lid off. That's it. So I'm going to pop a little bit more in now. Wipe my teaspoon. Add a little bit more. I'm going to drizzle this in the same way. It goes on. Actually, I haven't put enough in. Let's put a bit more in. There we go. And don't worry, if you have extra marzipan left over, you will definitely find people who are eager and happy to just eat your marzipan. Live in the fridge a good while. So dribble a little more in. Then let's do the taste test. Much better. So now I'm just going to take the two and mix them together with my hands, just pushing them into each other. Until I've got my nice ball of marzipan again. We're going to be rolling this out in a moment. And so if you can get yourself some kind of surface whereby you could roll this out, you're going to be sprinkling a little bit of the almond flour onto the surface. And then you're going to be using your rolling pin or bottle. If you don't have a rolling pin, just an empty glass bottle will do. It's important that the surface you're going to roll out on is dry. So if you've been using any sort of board or flexible chopping mat in front of you, it's a good idea just to give it a little wipe. Get it nice and dry. Because you don't want your mixture sticking to your cutting board. So give it a good dry. And then we're going to get some almond flour, the finer almond flour, perfect for rolling things out. We're just going to sprinkle it onto the chopping mat, onto the surface, whichever it is you're using. Take our ball of marzipan. It's been really well pushed into itself. This is great for stress release. This is working away at this marzipan, pushing into it. You can really be quite heavy-handed with it. We're going to push it down onto the chopping mat so that we've soaked up or picked up some of the ground almond on the bottom, and then we flip it over and put it back down, because this will now stop the rolling pin from sticking. And we're going to roll it out. If yours is falling apart as you roll it, it needs to go back in the S blade and have more liquid added to it. It just means it's a little bit dry, that's all. So turning it as I go. In fact, if I move this out of the way for a minute, you can see more clearly what I'm doing. I'm just rolling out this marzipan. And that almond flour will stop it sticking to the surface, hopefully. There we go. Now, you may not get an exact roll out. There might be cracks in it or chips in it. It doesn't matter, because it's very easy to heal this marzipan. You simply just push it back together again once it's on the cake. It's very easy, it's no problem. I have a nice big piece here. I'm now going to actually just make that a little thinner. If you haven't got enough for the size of your cake, again, really simple. Just go back to your S blade and blend up a little bit, sorry, S blade up a little bit more almond flour and essence. So I'm going to bring back my cake. And then I'm just going to transfer my marzipan to the top of my cake. Don't worry if it falls apart, it usually does. It's very easy to put back together once you've got the cake underneath the majority of it. Just bring it over onto the cake. As you can see, mine's in all sorts of bits, but that's fine, because as I maneuver it into place, it's very, very easy with my fingers just to fix all the cracks. They literally become invisible after a while. You can just patch it all up. It sticks to itself, it repairs itself. It's very easy. So around we go, all the way around the cake. Again, I can use my rolling pin even on top of the cake to help it flatten out nicely. There we go. It doesn't matter how much of a patched up job it looks, because once you've rolled your rolling pin over it a few times, it'll all merge in with itself beautifully. Just roll over all the way around. In any case, we're going to be actually covering the top of this with a sprinkle. So none of these little cracks are going to show at all anyway. Roll the pin over. Press with my fingers. Great, just gather up my extra pieces of marzipan and put them to one side. Now the almond flour that we used to make sure the marzipan didn't stick to your rolling surface is the same thing that we're going to sprinkle over the top of the cake. I'm just pushing it down around the edges, making sure it's come nice and flush to the edge of the cake tin all the way around. Nice and smoothly. Now, here is my almond flour. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to literally shake it like snow over the top of the cake. Some of it will go on your work surface, but don't worry, that's easy enough to clean up afterwards. Just shake it over like a little snowstorm, all over the top. You can do it as thick as you like. You can make it really quite covered, or you can leave some of the marzipan showing for extra colour variance. It's whatever appeals to you. So finally you end up with a very nice pale topping to your Christmas cake, which very much looks like snow to me. Now, of course, comes the fun bit, because our cake has been in there, pressed down, pushed into the form of the cake tin. We now have the delight of releasing it and seeing what it looks like when it stands up on its own. This is a breathtaking moment for everybody. But rest assured, yours will be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about where I'm going to put this. What am I going to present it on? How am I going to plate it up? Well, cake boards are really useful. This one's covered in silver. You can get gold ones, you can get round ones. Today I've chosen a square one to show off the circular shape of the cake. So I'm going to place that down in front of me. I'm going to lift the entire cake onto the cake board. Now, the thing about these spring-form cake tins is that the bottom of the cake tin is going to remain in place whilst this cake is presented, cut and consumed. You don't need to take it off its base. The only thing you need to be cautious of is that whatever utensil you use to cut your cake, once you've released it from the outer collar, isn't something sharp that's going to damage the bottom of the cake tin that is still remaining underneath the cake. So you're better off with some kind of plastic knife or a plastic spatula or something to cut the cake with. Or if you use a metal knife, which I must admit I do, I'm just very careful when I get to the bottom of the cake that I don't dig it into the cake tin. So here it is. It's sitting now on top of my cake board. If you have a cake board, just a simple large dinner plate size would just do perfectly. Lift the whole cake and pop it on there. And then you've got this really useful gadget of this little lever at the side that's going to enable us to free it from the outer ring. So I'm just going to turn that, loosen the outer ring. And then very carefully, giving a very slight movement side to side, I'm just going to release the cake and lift this form up. Just do it slowly and carefully. You might need to rotate it just a little bit, just to make sure the cake doesn't come with it. There we go. So this is coming up really nicely. There we are. But we yet have to do the decorations. So far we have this beautiful Christmas cake, rich with dried fruit and nuts, just full of goodness. And on top, this nice marzipan layer with a nice snowy surface. Now what we're going to do to just fancy this up a bit, and you may or may not choose to do this, is I like to get a nice red ribbon. This ribbon actually has wire threaded through its outer margins here. It's easily picked up from places like craft stores, Hobbycraft, so on and so forth, or just a plain piece of ribbon. The only advantage of the metal edge here, discreetly hidden under the fabric, is that it just helps the ribbon to stay in place and keep its shape. So I'm going to wrap this around the outside of the cake. And to hold it in place, I very simply take a cocktail stick, which is a little tiny stick with very sharp ends. I'm just going to break one end off. So I've just got a short little stick with a point. And then as I turn the cake, I'm just going to push that into the ribbon from the outside at a very slight angle into the cake, and it will just secure that ribbon in place, and it'll stay there now. It doesn't need much of a hold. On top of the cake, of course, you can decorate as you so wish. I've got a few little things here. I've got a nice snowman and some jolly little person with a little bird on their walking stick. I'm going to pop that on the cake. I also have a happy Christmas sign, which I'm going to place on there as well. A fir tree. You can have fun collecting these things as the years go by, especially if you've got little ones. Here, of course, we can't have a Christmas cake without Santa, so he's going to sit over there. And then, for the sake of all creatures great and small, we have the two little reindeer who are going to come and join in the fun over here. So let me see if I can get this a little closer to you so you can see the finished result. Here we have it. In fact,
Oh my gosh, that's just amazing, Rozalind.
oh!
Oh.
When I nearly put it to the dogs, which wouldn't have been quite my intention, which does remind me, by the way, everyone, if you do have dogs in your house, please do understand that the mixed dried fruit is poisonous to them because it's dried grapes, and some dogs can literally have fatal reactions to them. So don't be dropping your dried fruit on the ground if you've got dogs in the house, as I nearly did just then. But that, in any case, everybody, is my Christmas cake. I think what we might need to do is to cut a slice so that
Absolutely.
you can see how it looks when it's cut, yeah, because it does actually cut. She says with great confidence. So I'm going to just bring it back here a ways. Let's clear my decks a little bit. If anybody has any questions about this cake, please do. I'd be very keen to help anybody who wants to make a success of this, particularly if they're having any difficulties.
Rozalind, I wanted to tell you that I was trying all those ingredients, and they absolutely, you cannot just stop eating them. They're delicious. And I have those beautiful Christmas trees that I got.
Oh, lovely.
Yes, and a snowman, Lennox snowman that I will put in. And I want to ask, I want to tell everybody that thank you for spending this hour with us and making the healthiest raw vegan Christmas cake. It's absolutely amazing recipe, absolutely amazing. I couldn't even predict that it will go this way and how it will look and how it would taste. And
I'll just get a knife and cut it before we go.
Yes, let's cut it. So please make those pictures before you cut it, guys. Rozalind, can you take a picture before you slice it?
I think my little cameraman here is going to take or my tall cameraman, not my little cameraman.
Little big cameraman.
I also want to let you know you're going to really want to read the chat by the end of, after the show ends, we'll send you a copy of the chat. But I asked everybody if they enjoyed the show to type in their thank yous. You are getting inundated with thank yous. So
it's been my
you did a fantastic job. This is the first time you've ever let Francesca or myself see you make Christmas cake. So thank you.
Uncovered.
Well, my very first food demo of my entire life, I was pleased that I didn't decorate the kitchen with my ingredients. That was good.
That was unbelievable, just unbelievable.
Francesca would have caught it before it hit the floor.
The ribbon off. Have you finished photographing, Mr. Photography Man? Okay.
I hope everyone, as you stated, should present it to your family for Christmas, this cake, or for any holidays.
So we go, and the knife I'm using actually is a metal knife, but it's a dinner knife as opposed to a sharp kitchen knife again, so the edge doesn't cut the or damage the pan here. I'm just going to stick my knife, and I'm going to serve you a piece, Larissa. Here we go. Cut it down, so good to far. The first piece out, of course, we all know with any cake is always the least attractive because it kind of has to extract itself from its surroundings, but it's just cut. As you can see from the top here, it's cut really nice and cleanly. Yeah.
Beautiful.
You get a plate.
Yeah, let's make big small camera girl to taste it. Tell us how it tastes.
And the slide this under and lift out a slice.
Wow, gorgeous.
There we go. And again, because raw food is so forgiving, it doesn't quite sit up like you would like. That's because it was the first piece out that it left a tiny bit of its side behind. There we go. Soon fixed, soon fixed. So there we have it, the cake. I've got people here around me jumping up and down wanting to have some.
Go ahead and try it. We want to hear.
Can you show us the cake with the slice missing rather than, can you turn it 90 degrees? No, the big cake.
Oh, yes, of course. Hang on, let me just
Yeah, let us see in there.
there that really did belong with that cake, that slice. But don't worry, it's always the same with the first slice. In fact, I usually take the first slice for myself, really because I want it, but I pretend it's because it's the least attractive. And there's the cake, and there's the slice.
Wow.
Wow.
Really fantastic job. Really, really well done.
Would you like a piece of Christmas cake?
Once you've done a couple of 100 food demos,
She stole my fork.
you want to eat that on screen, Francesca? Come on out on screen and eat it.
Yes, we want to see your expression. Is that good? On scale 1 to 10.
It's amazing.
All
It's a 12.
right.
On 1 to 10, it's a 12.
Maybe more.
Maybe more.
Well, Rozalind, thank you very much. It was such a pleasure to watch you, to listen to you, to make this cake with you. And we really appreciate your efforts and your time and your recipe and your contribution and your beautiful outlook on everything that you had to say. Thank you very much.
I so appreciate what you're doing here, Larissa. It's the most wonderful initiative, and it's such an important part of hopefully where everyone is trying to go.
Yes.
And, you know, it's
So
a bit like
Rozalind,
snowball. Hopefully every time, you know, you're able to host one of these events, the snowball rolls and a little bit more snow gets attached to it.
Absolutely.
It's you know, we transform people's eating habits one bite at a time, right?
Yes,
Thank you
absolutely.
so
I
much.
mean, what's a delight? What a delight. It would never trade this cake to anything that was made commercially. I mean, this is just make the holidays so much more special.
Yeah, it's truthfully. And I mean, I think from a vegan point of view, I just think that Christmas is all about peace and joy.
Yes.
It's about peace and joy. And really, you know, there are people I know who are devout in a religious sense, people who aren't religious who are just spiritual, and people who are neither. But it doesn't matter who you are or what your beliefs are, to take time from life to celebrate joy and peace and love. It's a wonderful way to do it through the creation of beautiful food, and certainly food that has not caused any sentient being any distress, any pain. because to my mind, no meal can be a meal of peace if what you're serving has suffered. And so to me, making Christmas food of a vegan type has to be one of the highlights of the year, when really we do bring our hearts together in compassion and love and peace. And thank you so much, everyone who took the time to be with me this evening and allow me to share with you my recipe. Many, many blessings to you all, and maybe you have a deeply peaceful and joyous Christmas. Thank you so much.